The summer of 1833 clung to Louisiana like a fever that would not break. The air along the Bayou Teche was thick with the scent of rot and lilies, the sweet and the spoiled tangled together as if they could not live apart. The old Duval estate rose from the swamp mist like the memory of something that had died, but refused to be buried. Travelers who passed by on their way to New Orleans said it looked like a mausoleum disguised as a mansion, its windows shuttered, its gardens drowned, its long galleries veiled in vines and silence. Few dared to approach. Those who did often left before nightfall, whispering later of a pale woman who drifted through the halls with eyes like frozen glass. Her name was Lucinda. She came to the Duval house as a bride, or something like it, in the spring of that same year. The locals remembered her arrival because of how quiet it was. No carriage procession, no wedding bells, no laughter spilling from open doors. Only a single coach rolling through the cypress trees, its wheels sinking into the mud, carrying a woman dressed in white and a man who looked too old to be her husband. That man was Judge Silas Duval, wealthy, stern, and widowed twice before. He was known for the heaviness of his voice and the chill of his manner. It was said he married Lucinda in haste, after meeting her in New Orleans, where she had been working as a nurse in a hospital for fever patients. No one knew much about her, only that she was beautiful, fragile, and far too quiet for her own good. Lucinda, when she stepped from the carriage, seemed more like a spectre than a bride. Her skin was the color of candle wax, her hair the palest gold, her eyes gray, blue like smoke over water. She smiled when the judge offered his arm, but the smile never reached her eyes. The servants who watched from the gallery crossed themselves, for they said later she looked as though she had come not to join the living, but to keep company with the dead. The Duval house had stood for 3 generations. Its walls were thick with secrets. The judge's first wife, Marie Claire, had died in childbirth, his second, Elise, of fever. Their portraits still hung in the parlor, though their faces had grown dim with dust. Lucinda was expected to bring life back to the place, music, laughter, children. Instead, she brought silence. At first, she kept to her chambers, speaking little and wandering only at dusk. The maids whispered that she hardly ate, that she spent hours seated at her dressing table, brushing her hair, though the mirror behind her was covered in a black cloth. When the housekeeper once asked her why she covered it, Lucinda answered softly, "Because I do not wish to see who stands behind me." The woman laughed nervously, but that night she swore she heard footsteps pacing outside her door long after everyone had gone to bed. The judge doted on her in his own cold way, gifts of pearls, imported perfume, a piano she never touched. Yet there were nights when the servants heard shouting from his study, his voice sharp and her sobbing faint but clear. Once a maid claimed she saw the judge drag Lucinda down the hallway by the wrist. The next morning Lucinda's sleeve was torn, and there was a bruise shaped like a hand on her arm. But when asked, she only said she had slipped against the balustrade. By midsummer the house had grown restless. Doors creaked open, though no wind stirred. A smell of damp earth lingered in the corridors. One evening a stable boy found the judge in the family crypt, standing over an open coffin. He dismissed the boy harshly and forbade anyone to speak of it, but word spread. He had been visiting his dead wives. Lucinda began walking in the gardens after midnight, barefoot in her nightdress, her hair loose around her shoulders. She said she could not sleep because of the voices. The servants told her the only voices were frogs and wind, but she shook her head. "They whisper from the walls," she said. "They call for me by name." The cook, a superstitious woman named Alma, placed a cross above Lucinda's door. It vanished the next morning. The same day, a mirror cracked in the hallway without being touched. When Lucinda saw it, she fainted dead away. The doctor summoned from Lafayette said she was delicate, suffering from nervous exhaustion, perhaps hysteria. The judge dismissed him after 2 visits and said he would tend to his wife himself, but after that no one saw Lucinda for nearly a week. When she appeared again, she was thinner, her eyes darker, her smile strange. She thanked the servants for their patience and said she was feeling so much lighter now. The maids noticed her wedding ring was gone. The judge, when asked about it, said only that it had been misplaced. The following nights grew heavier with heat. Cicadas screamed, and thunder rolled far away across the swamps. Then came the day the judge was found dead. It was the morning of August 14th. The butler discovered him in his study, slumped across his desk. His skin was pale, his lips blue, a decanter of brandy beside him half full. The doctor said it was his heart, but when the coroner opened the body later that afternoon, he frowned and said quietly, this was no heart failure, this was poison. The household fell into panic. Lucinda was nowhere to be found. They searched the estate from cellar to attic, but it was the gardener who found her, lying on the marble floor of the crypt beside the judge's coffin, her hands folded, her eyes open and staring upward. She was alive, but barely. When they carried her back to the house, she whispered one sentence before she fell into unconsciousness. He promised me they'd stop calling. No one knew what she meant. For 3 days she hovered between life and death. The local sheriff came, asked questions, found no clear answers. There was no sign of poison in her room, no bottle, no cup. The servants were terrified. The house, they said, had grown colder. The piano played once in the night, though no one was near it. The judge's study door opened on its own each dusk. When Lucinda awoke, she asked first if the judge had been buried. When told yes, she smiled faintly and said, "Then I can rest." She refused food, refused visitors. She said she wanted only to be near him. Against the advice of the doctor, she insisted on being taken to the crypt each day. At first, they thought grief had broken her mind, but the longer she lingered there, the stranger she became. She began speaking softly to the tombs as if answering unseen questions. She stayed for hours, sometimes until night fell, her white dress visible in the torchlight like a ghost already at home among the dead. The servants began to leave one by one. Alma left a note on her departure. That woman belongs to the other side. By September only 2 remained, the butler, Mr. Graves, and the maid, Heloise. They were the ones who found Lucinda again one night lying beside the judge's coffin, her hand resting upon the marble lid, her breath shallow. When they tried to lift her, she resisted and whispered, "Do not wake him, he'll be angry." After that, they no longer tried to bring her back to the house. She stayed in the crypt most nights, sleeping on the stone floor, her candle burning low beside her. The townsfolk started calling her Lucinda the Pale. Rumors spread that she had been the one to poison the judge, though no proof was ever found. Some said she confessed to the priest before he left the parish, others that she had been cursed by the spirits of the judge's wives. But those who had seen her face said it was neither guilt nor madness they saw there. It was peace, as if she had found at last the quiet she had been searching for. Then, one stormy night in late October, lightning struck the old magnolia tree beside the house. The bolt tore through the roof, setting fire to the west wing. By morning, the Duval mansion was half destroyed. When the sheriff arrived, he found the crypt open and empty. Lucinda's body was never recovered. Only her nightdress was found, laid neatly on the coffin lid, and beside it a small vial of laudanum, empty. The fire was said to have burned itself out around dawn. The rain had started again, hissing against the ashes. From the road, passers-by could see the ruin of the house, the smoke curling upward like a shroud, and there, among the ruins, someone swore they saw her, the pale figure of a woman moving slowly between the tombstones, her hands outstretched, her face calm as sleep. But when they called her name, she turned and was gone. In the years that followed, the Duval estate was left to decay. The swamp crept back over the gardens. Vines devoured the galleries, and the rooms filled with silence. No one bought the land. They said the air around it was heavy with something that would not leave. Sometimes at dusk, travelers still hear faint music drifting across the water, the notes of a piano played by unseen hands. And sometimes, when the mist rises from the bayou, they say a woman's voice can be heard, whispering softly, almost tenderly, as though she were singing a lullaby to someone who cannot wake. They say she sleeps beside him still. The year after the fire, no one lived near the Duval estate. The neighbors, scattered across miles of bayou and sugar land, stopped speaking of it altogether. The burned shell of the mansion stood like a skeleton in the swamp, its chimneys black and crooked, its rooms filled with moss and rainwater. The judge's tomb lay open, its marble lid half shattered from the heat of that night. The lawman closed the case with a single line, the woman presumed dead in fire, but some things in Louisiana are not so easily declared finished. In the spring of 1834, a new owner came. His name was Dr. Ambrose Calder, a physician from Baton Rouge, recently widowed himself. He had purchased the land for almost nothing, seeing in it the promise of solitude and perhaps a new beginning. He was not a man easily frightened. He had tended yellow fever victims and performed surgeries by candlelight. He told the locals he did not believe in ghosts. Yet on his first night in the Duval house, when the wind rattled the shutters and something shifted faintly in the corridor outside his room, even he found himself listening too long to the silence. Calder began his restoration with scientific zeal. He catalogued the ruins, cleared the overgrown gardens, and set up his medical study in what had once been the judge's library. He kept a journal, noting each sound, each strange draught, each faint odor of decay that seemed to rise even from the walls. He was methodical, skeptical, yet within weeks he admitted that the place affected him. The air felt heavier there, as if the house itself breathed. The villagers avoided the estate, refusing his offers of employment. They told him the land was cursed. The mistress still walks, one old fisherman muttered, eyes wide. She sleeps where the dead lie, and she keeps them company. Calder smiled politely, noting the phrase in his book. Persistent local superstition, possibly hysteria linked to traumatic community memory. But curiosity began to eat at him. One evening he ventured down to the crypt. The door was open, rust streaking the iron hinges. Inside, dust lay thick as snow. The coffins of the two Duval wives were untouched, but the judge's tomb was bare. On the floor beside it, faint marks remained, a shape like a body's outline, preserved by soot. Calder stood there a long time, his lantern flickering. He could almost imagine the pale woman lying there, her face serene, her hands folded. Something about the stillness unnerved him. When he left, he thought he heard the faint sound of fabric brushing stone, though no one was there. Days passed. His dreams began to change. He dreamt of a woman in white walking through the corridors, her bare feet silent, her eyes open but seeing nothing. Each time she came closer, he woke with his pulse racing. Once he found himself standing at the window at dawn, convinced someone had been calling his name. He began drinking laudanum to sleep, telling himself it was exhaustion. Then one night he discovered the piano. He had ordered new furniture to replace what had burned, but the piano that stood in the ruined parlor was not one of them. It was the old Duval instrument, blackened by smoke yet strangely intact. When he lifted the lid, he saw the keys had been wiped clean of dust. As if played recently, he struck a note. It rang out pure and low. Another followed, and another, until he realized he was playing a melody he did not know but somehow remembered. The rhythm was slow, mournful, almost like a lullaby. Then the lantern beside him flickered and went out. The last thing he heard before the darkness closed was a woman's voice, very soft, singing the next line of the tune. He told himself it was the wind. He told himself it was memory, suggestion, fatigue. Yet the next morning his servant, one of the few locals willing to stay, found footprints in the ash across the floor, bare, small, feminine, leading from the piano to the corridor and ending before the mirror that hung beside the door. Calder tried to ignore it, burying himself in his studies, but he could not shake the sense that the house was watching him. He heard water dripping where there were no leaks, whispers in rooms he had sealed. He began writing letters to a colleague, Professor Henry Latham in New Orleans, describing the phenomena in meticulous detail. If these sensations persist, he wrote, I may have to admit that certain psychological impressions can be imprinted upon place. The human mind, when left alone long enough among remnants of tragedy, may generate its own ghosts. Latham replied politely, urging him to take rest. Instead, Calder delved deeper. He unearthed old parish records, searching for traces of Lucinda Duval. He found her marriage certificate, dated April 12th, 1833, but no record of birth. In hospital archives he found mention of a nurse named Lucinda Gray, dismissed from service after tending to fever wards. Her file noted fragile constitution, melancholia, morbid fixation on death. That line stayed with him. He began to see her not as a spectre, but as a woman crushed by grief, drawn to stillness because the living world was too loud. But reason falters in solitude. As the months wore on, Calder began to sense her presence not as memory but as breath. Once, while dissecting a specimen, he felt a chill at his neck, as though someone leaned close to whisper. Another time, while bathing, he saw the imprint of a hand on the fogged mirror, small, perfect, and fading quickly. He began speaking aloud to the empty rooms, addressing her as if she might answer. Lucinda, he would say softly, if you are here, you are not forgotten. Then came the night of the thunderstorm. Rain hammered the roof, lightning flared across the swamp. Calder could not sleep. He took his lantern and went again to the crypt. The air was thick and wet, the walls glistening. The judge's coffin stood open still, its lid askew, but now something new lay upon it, a white rose, fresh, though no rose bushes grew for miles. He lifted it, his hand trembling. Beneath it lay a folded scrap of paper. Do not wake him, he'll be angry. He dropped it as if burned. When he looked up, he saw her. Lucinda stood at the far end of the crypt, pale, luminous in the lamplight. Her dress was the same as in his dreams, torn at the hem, her hair loose. Her eyes were not hollow but calm, almost kind. You shouldn't be here, she said softly. Her voice was clear, steady. He doesn't rest easily. Calder froze, mind torn between terror and awe. Lucinda, you're alive. She smiled faintly. Alive, I was once. That is enough. Then, as he took a step toward her, the lantern sputtered. In that brief darkness he heard movement, the soft scrape of stone. When the flame returned, she was gone. Only the rose remained, lying where she had stood. He returned to the house shaking. For the next days he could not eat or write. He began to feel fevered. He would wake at night certain that she lay beside him, her hand cold in his. Once he reached out and touched only empty sheets, yet the scent of lilies filled the air. He began locking his doors, covering mirrors, leaving candles burning through the night. At last he decided to leave. He packed his notes, intending to ride for Baton Rouge at dawn. But that evening, as he passed the parlor one final time, he heard the piano again, the same melody, slow, sorrowful, calling. He told himself to keep walking, to leave. Instead he stepped inside. Lucinda sat at the piano. Her back was to him, her hands moving gracefully over the keys. He could see through her dress the faint shimmer of light, as if she were woven from mist. You shouldn't have come back, she said without turning. He doesn't forgive. Who? Calder asked, voice trembling. The judge. She stopped playing. Silence filled the room. Then slowly she turned toward him. Her face was pale but serene. The living, she said. The window behind her burst open with the wind scattering ash. When Calder shielded his eyes and looked again, she was gone. The keys still moved for a moment, then stilled. He left that night, riding through the storm until the house disappeared behind the trees. He returned weeks later with men from the parish, determined to prove the truth, but the house stood empty again. No footprints, no rose, no trace of life. Only his journal remained on the desk, though he had taken it with him. The last page was not in his handwriting. It read, "I sleep beside him still. The doctor will understand." After that Calder vanished. His horse was found near the bayou, reins broken. Some said he drowned in the swamp. Others believed he joined her, another soul bound to the house. The Duval estate was abandoned once more, left to the vines and the silence. Only the piano remained untouched, waiting. Years later, travelers passing along the river at dusk would swear they heard faint music drifting through the fog, a woman's song and the soft echo of a man's voice answering. They said the house had two ghosts now, not one, and when the moon was full you could see them through the broken windows, two pale figures seated side by side, their hands almost touching, their faces turned towards something only they could see. The locals still call her Lucinda the Pale, the mistress who slept beside the dead, and taught the living to join her. The Duval estate lay silent for nearly a decade after Dr. Calder's disappearance. The swamp claimed what fire had spare. Roots split the floorboards, vines crawled through shattered windows, and the roof caved in under years of rain. Locals stopped using the old road that passed its gates, saying that every traveler who did heard music in the fog and saw a light flicker in the ruins. Children told stories of a pale woman at the window, her hands folded, waiting. But stories in Louisiana grow wild like the cypress, half truth, half shadow. It was not until 1843 that anyone returned to the place. A government surveyor, Mr. Thomas Alden, was sent from New Orleans to chart the bayou lands for new levees. He was a practical man, no believer in spirits. He had fought in the Seminole campaign, slept among corpses, and seen enough death to know it left marks only in memory, not in earth. When he reached the Duval property, he saw only another ruin fit to be mapped and forgotten. Still, there was something unsettling about its quiet. The air was too still, as if waiting. The path to the house was half swallowed by moss, and the gates, eaten with rust, stood open like jaws. Alden made camp in what remained of the front gallery, setting up his instruments under the leaning columns. He had brought with him a young assistant, Joseph Miller, who refused to go near the crypt after dusk. "The dead don't stay still here," the boy muttered. Alden laughed, but that night even he kept his pistol close. The first sign of strangeness came with the piano. It was still there, though warped by damp, its lid half fallen. Alden swore he heard it as he measured the foundations, 3 faint notes drifting through the rain, soft and hesitant. He assumed it was the wind through the strings, yet when he went inside, the room was silent. Only the smell of lilies lingered, faint but fresh. He noted it in his ledger, odor of flowers, unexplained. The entry was practical, detached, but his hand trembled as he wrote. The next morning Joseph was gone. His bedroll lay undisturbed, but his lantern was missing, and there were footprints in the mud leading toward the crypt. Alden followed them. Inside, he found the lantern still burning beside the judge's tomb, its light flickering against the damp walls. On the coffin lid lay a small bouquet of white roses, new dew still on them. There was no sign of the boy. Alden searched for hours, shouting until his throat bled. He found only a scrap of paper wedged between 2 stones. "She says he forgives now." The handwriting was uneven, almost childlike. Alden pocketed it and returned to camp, shaken but determined to understand. He was not a superstitious man. He believed in facts, in cause and effect. So that night he forced himself to stay awake, to listen. Around midnight he heard it again. The piano, not wind this time, but deliberate notes, a melody steady and mournful. He rose, gun in hand, and followed the sound. The parlor was dim with moonlight filtering through the roof's broken slats. The piano keys moved beneath invisible fingers. Then he saw her. Lucinda sat as the stories described, pale, still, her dress trailing like mist. But her face was not that of a spirit. It was too human, too sad. She turned toward him, and her lips parted as if to speak. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "They're at peace now. Don't wake them." Alden froze. He wanted to speak, to reason, to ask what she meant, but before he could move, the image wavered and dissolved like breath on glass. The keys stilled. The air felt suddenly heavy, suffocating. He stumbled outside and did not sleep until dawn. The following day he returned to the crypt, driven by both fear and logic. He examined the structure carefully, noting its architecture, the cracks in the stone, the faint channels in the floor. It was then he made a discovery, a narrow shaft behind the judge's coffin, leading downward into the earth. He cleared it with his spade and found a passage, its walls carved roughly from limestone, leading into darkness. He fetched a lantern and descended. The tunnel ran deep beneath the house. The air was damp and close, filled with the smell of rot. At its end he found a small chamber lined with shelves. Upon them lay bottles of chemicals, jars of herbs, surgical instruments rusted with age and bones. Human bones arranged neatly, almost reverently. On the far wall hung a mirror, blackened with soot, and beneath it a single chair. On the floor, half buried in dirt, he found a book. It was Dr. Calder's journal. Alden read by lantern light, the words trembling on the page. Calder had recorded everything: his experiments with sleep and suggestion, his belief that Lucinda's apparition was not ghostly but psychological residue imprinted by trauma. He had begun conducting seances, using laudanum and music to recreate her presence, convinced he could reach her mind through his own. The later entries grew erratic. He described hearing her voice, feeling her hand. "Then she has forgiven me. She says he sleeps now. I am to join them." The last page was smeared with ink and something darker. Beneath it lay a small vial. Alden felt the cold creep up his spine. Calder had not been haunted. He had succumbed to delusion. The piano, the voice, the roses, all were traces of his own fevered mind. The apparitions were memories carved into the house by obsession, hallucinations replayed by anyone sensitive enough to feel them. Lucinda had been real once, but her ghost was human madness, repeating itself like an echo that refused to fade. He left the crypt, shaken but enlightened. The house was no curse, only history, sorrow too deep to die. He wrote a full report that evening, detailing his findings, his plan to seal the tunnels, and his conclusion that the legends of Lucinda the Pale were rooted in psychological contagion. He felt relief, almost pride. The mystery was solved, yet as he finished the final page, he smelled lilies again. He looked up. The piano was playing, slow, deliberate notes, the same mournful tune. He stood, heart hammering, telling himself it was impossible. The rational mind clung to its shield, wind, vibration, memory. But when he turned, he saw something that broke his certainty forever. At the edge of the parlor stood Joseph, the missing boy. His face was pale, his eyes wide, and behind him, Lucinda's hand rested gently on his shoulder. Her expression was serene, almost maternal. "You see now," she said softly, "some truths don't end with reason." Alden stepped forward, but the lantern flame sputtered and went out. In the darkness came the sound of footsteps, 2 pairs, retreating into the distance, fading like music underwater. When he relit the flame, the room was empty. Only his report remained on the table, and across its last line someone had written in delicate script, "Let them rest." He fled the house at dawn. The official records state only that Thomas Alden completed his survey, but died en route to New Orleans, his boat overturned in the bayou. The papers he carried were recovered, water, damaged but legible. The final page was signed not by him, but in another hand, Lucinda Duval. After that, the estate was abandoned forever. The government built the levee farther east, leaving the ruins to sink slowly into the swamp. The world forgot, as it always does. But sometimes, in the still heat of late summer, travelers along the water swear they hear faint music drifting through the reeds, a piano, soft and distant. Some say it's only the wind through the cypress. Others say it's her. Years later, an archivist named Clara Duval, descendant of the judge's brother, found Calder's journal and Alden's papers in a box at the courthouse. She read them by candlelight and found herself strangely moved. There were no ghosts in the pages, only grief, loneliness, and love twisted by time. Yet one passage struck her most. We haunt ourselves more than the dead ever could. She copied it into her notebook and closed the file. That night she dreamed of a woman sitting at a piano, her hands poised, her eyes soft with longing. When Clara woke, she could still hear the melody faintly echoing in her ears, and for a moment she wasn't sure if it came from the dream or from somewhere beyond the window. In the morning she returned the journal to its shelf. The light through the courthouse glass turned the dust to gold. For a heartbeat she thought she saw movement reflected there, a pale figure standing behind her, watching, smiling faintly. But when she turned, there was only sunlight and silence. The story of Lucinda the Pale has since become part of Louisiana's folklore, a tale told in whispers, not of ghosts but of grief. The mistress who slept beside the dead was never truly a phantom, but a woman so consumed by sorrow that she became one. Her haunting was the echo of her longing, passed from one lonely soul to another, generation after generation. The Duval estate is gone now, sunk beneath water and moss, but on certain nights, when the moon rides high and the bayou mist curls like smoke, the surface ripples faintly, as though someone beneath stirs in her sleep, turning toward the one who still calls her name. And if you stand very still, listening, you might hear it too, the piano, the voice, the whisper, Lucinda the Pale, the mistress who slept beside the dead and never quite left the living.